All right. Hello, everyone. I'll just give it a minute or so to let everybody trickle in. I understand that it takes a little bit of time just to log on, so we'll just have a wait. Welcome to our third session of the day so far, sorry. I'll let everybody trickle in. It's been a busy morning already for me, as you can already tell. Welcome to our third session. We are going to start in about 30 seconds, just letting everybody finally trickle in. All right, about 10 more seconds and then we'll jump into it. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Keela's 3-day virtual conference called Plugged In. If you attended our morning session so far, welcome back. And if you're just tuning in now, welcome. And thanks for joining us on our third and final day. Before we begin this session, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping details. So first, the session is being recorded and you will receive the recordings and the slide decks after the conference. It will be about an hour in length, including about a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session at the end. So throughout the session, we do encourage you to ask questions. You can pop them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and then we will get to them all at the end. If you have something immediate that you'd like to say, just raise your hand as an attendee, and then we have our tech man behind the scenes, and he'll get back to you. So with that, I would like to introduce and extend a huge warm welcome to two speakers who were supposed to speak at N10's NTC conference that was unfortunately canceled. Instead, they've generously offered to lead this session online with all of you today. So with that, I'd like to welcome Annie Llewellyn, which is a consultant and advisor for Mobilized America, and Renata Sahagian, Chief Experience Officer of No Vet Alone. And so today, the title of their session is When Volunteers Don't and Can't Show Up in Person and How to Fill the Gaps. Thank you so much for being here today, Annie and Renata, and I'll pass it off to the two of you.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Thank you to the Keela team. Thank you so much to everyone on this call. We are so excited to connect with you, especially because we cannot be in Baltimore with you all in person. This is a really special opportunity, so thank you. As you mentioned, my name is Annie Llewellyn. I've been advising Mobilize, a tech company focused on volunteer recruitment and management since about a year now. I started my career in nonprofits with Mercy Corps, doing humanitarian aid and development. And I kind of became, after a few years, I became eager to really understand and kind of explore different business models. And so I did what probably is the exact opposite thing you could think of to nonprofits. I went into management consulting, specifically private equity management consulting. And then I really, as much as I love that work as well, I really missed the social impact and being part of something bigger and being part of a mission. And so I started my own business advising startups that had a focus on making the world a better place. And so when I found Mobilize, I remember my first conversation with the co-founders, I immediately thought how much I could have used something like this at Mercy Corps, where we were constantly thinking about, especially in the field, how do we better recruit more, not just volunteers, but supporters, and how do we engage them at higher levels across the journey or across their journey with Mercy Corps. So excited to share all of that with you today. And with that, I will hand it over to Renata to introduce herself and describe kind of what she's been hearing from the community in terms of challenges that you're facing.
Great. So unlike Annie, I started out in the for-profit sector. I was an entrepreneur, had my own business for about 15 years, but at the same time, I was volunteering at the MS Society and many, many years, 15 years or so with them. And then I was looking for a change, and I had the opportunity to join the staff in 2010. And I have to say, I never looked back. The social impact, giving back, nonprofit bug kind of caught me, and I ended up becoming the director for Bike MS for the Southern California, Nevada, and Hawaii. Had great territories. And then from there, and this led me to the executive director position at the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. And that led me to the current position that I have now, which is Chief Experience Officer for No Vet Alone and our Life Aid Hope Resilience Initiative. We work with vets and first responders in preventing suicide. And it's quite timely that we're talking about this now. And we are built, it's a startup, so we're building from the ground up. We're about 2 years old. And when Annie came to me with Mobilize, I said, oh my gosh, this is what we've been looking for, how to recruit volunteers and supporters. And I immediately jumped on the bandwagon. So I'm really happy to be here today and talk to you about some of the things that we're doing. So, which leads us to what we've been hearing from you, nonprofits at large, given our current circumstances and uncertainty. Volunteers are disappearing, in-person opportunities are closing, and we all know how important those in-person opportunities are to us. Demand for services are spiking and supplies are running out. So each of these challenges really rely on volunteers in some way, shape, or form, because volunteers are usually our strategic assets that we have. They go out and they're like our ambassadors out in the universe, spreading all the good that we're doing and our causes, but they're also our first line of defense to rely upon. And many of them, are kind of asking what to do. And so a perfect example is my buddy in Vegas has a restaurant, and he usually is really community minded. And he saw that the food bank in Vegas was really looking for canned food. So he started a food drive, and he also then realized there was a gap in people being able to eat as well. So if you brought, it was like 5 cans of food, he donated pizza. So the line was super long, but yet it served a purpose. And so he partnered with them on that. And then another example is, one of the food banks really needed peanut butter. They were out and they had a really huge demand, put out the word, and next thing you know, they had enough peanut butter for their full services. So people still want to volunteer. They want to give back. They just don't know really how in this climate. So how do we keep them engaged? And what can we do about it? And move on to virtual events. So Annie.
Great. Perfect setup, Renata. Given those very real challenges that we're facing, our objective for today and our hope is to leave you with a combination of quick wins, because we understand and know that you guys are eager to just take some things back to your organization and start executing immediately. We also, knowing that, volunteers not showing up is not only a short-term problem, we're also going to talk a little bit about long-term strategies on how to fill those gaps. So we're kind of attacking it from both angles here. Our presentation today, over the next hour, we're going to be structured as a series of recommended strategies. We're going to give you specific tactics underneath each strategy to help you execute on them, and share findings and data, including some key studies, to prove why these strategies have become priority for us. And the thesis that's really going to guide today's presentation is filling the gaps in volunteers when there's no opportunities and fewer people available requires a smarter volunteer journey or experience that recruits and engages more efficiently and effectively. So there are 4 strategies we're focusing on to build these smarter journeys. And when I say smarter, what I'm really meaning is data-driven. And when I say journey, we're talking about what the volunteer experience is. So from the moment that volunteer decides that they want to act, all the way through to having completed that action and all of the follow-up that they do. So especially when a volunteer can't show up in person, we have to, expand the traditional view of a volunteer. It's really easy, I think, to think about volunteers as people who just show up for one-off opportunities, but actually these people are so much more than that. And we'll dive into kind of how to think about that in a minute. 2, use virtual events to attract and engage supporters. Especially as the in-person opportunities are disappearing, we need to rely more and more on virtual events or actions to attract and engage people. And 3 is really about, we really need to be asking volunteers in the right way at the right times to do certain things. What we found is that, volunteers are often your most engaged group of people, and they want to act, they just need to really be primed to do specific actions. And last but not least, promote each other's events. We need, I think, more than ever to be collaborating with each other. And I think one of the things that underlies this is that volunteers are not a finite resource, especially when we expand the view of what a volunteer is. So quickly, since a lot of the data that we're going to be sharing today is going to come from the Mobilized platform, I think it's helpful just to ground you in what Mobilize is, how the platform works, just very high level. And I want to reiterate that although a lot of these strategies that we're talking through today are enabled by Mobilize, they are not Mobilize dependent. So at the highest level, Mobilize is an events management and volunteer recruitment platform. We focus on driving 3 things really well. The first is recruiting. We make recruiting easier, make recruiting volunteers, recruiting supporters much easier. The second thing is that we increase engagement, which means that we increase the rates at which people sign up, they show up, bring their friends, come back, and donate. And then third, all of that action that we just described is supercharged by a network on both sides. So on one side, you'll see we have the nonprofits that need action. So that's like you guys on one side that we're serving. We're making it easy for you guys to create events and actions and automate a lot of those interactions and tracking the data you need. And on the other side are the people who want to act, or your volunteers, your supporters. And right now on the platform, we have about 2,000 nonprofits in our nonprofit network and about 1.7 million volunteers. So we're constantly expanding and thinking of ways to expand that network. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Our vision for Mobilize is to really be the go-to platform for volunteering. So much like LinkedIn is the go-to when you want to search for a job, Mobilize, our vision is to be the go-to place for anybody that wants to do something for nonprofits. Just a quick kind of overview of what the volunteer sees and what the nonprofits see. On the left-hand side is a feed of actions that the volunteer sees when they search for an opportunity. And then on the right-hand side is what you would see on the back end. So this is like, keeping track of shift schedule, keeping track of who your volunteers are. And one of the things that's we're particularly focused on, and I think is a bit different, is we are trying to optimize conversion at every step. So basically means driving the most action at the highest possible rates at scale. And with that, I will hand it to Renata to talk about our strategy number 1.
Great. So expand the traditional view of a volunteer. So most of you have kind of in your mind what a volunteer is. It's a person who's at the check-in line, checking in your participants, or they're at a rest stop handing out water bottles, or they're, I don't know, an usher at a movie theater, things of that sort. But I like to look at every person that's connected to your nonprofit as a volunteer, because when you look at the for-profit areas, anyone who's connected to a cause in their mind becomes a volunteer. So it's your participants at your event, it's your board members, it's your program, your support group leaders, anyone who is connected to your cause. They can be considered a volunteer. They are not your staff, right? So if your staff is your staff, anyone outside of that is your volunteer. And because a participant in one of your events, whether it be your bike ride, your walk, your gala, can become your volunteer, traditional sense of the word, volunteer at another event. So to think that you can have these independent lists floating around and not capitalizing on that is quite silly. We used to have at the MS Society, Walk MS supports Bike MS, and Bike MS supports Walk MS, and there were a million different Excel documents back in the day. And then we had our program and support group leaders that were in a totally different ball game, and we couldn't market to them. And so the thing is, you need to build a consolidated list of supporters across all functions and campaigns, because that is, you want to have a unified messaging to them and let them participate. Why? We found out that when the bike, let's say, person who's riding and is a participant and fundraiser for your bike event walks or participates as a volunteer capacity, they get to see the full picture. Someone who's volunteering or is a support group leader and comes to your walk or your bike event, they get to see more of the whole picture and what's being done to support them. And on top of it all, it's that much more rewarding, and they feel that much more impact in what they're doing. So if someone is a participant and they're riding in a bike event, and they see the person that is a support group leader and they're connected, they have that much more of an in-depth knowledge of where their money is going and how are they connected. It's just that much more impactful, and they feel empowered and they're making a difference. So we did a study, a little informal study at the chapter that I was at in 2015, 2016, and we found out that $1 million was saved by volunteers across the board in all capacities. And that's huge. We were about a $7 to $8 million chapter at the time. And that's a huge significant savings. I mean, we would have had to pay more staff. We would have had to pay temp workers. And so they're not to be discounted. And there's a lot of different ways, and we could utilize, your traditional view of a volunteer. And then Mobilized created a study, and they found out that less than 10% of nonprofits surveyed had a consolidated list of volunteers, which is kind of silly. You really think about how you can best market your message to everyone and have them really feel connected and to a community, because that really is important to them.
So now that we've expanded your view of what a volunteer is, let's talk about using virtual events to attract and engage these supporters. So right now with COVID-19, there's a lot happening for your volunteers. There are many fewer in-person events. I think the only events are the ones that are probably for emergency purposes. So your volunteers, as a result, are going to assume that their opportunities to help are quite limited. And the second thing I think that's going on, and I've been hearing a lot, is that volunteers and people in general are just inundated with lots of organizations requesting a lot of time, requesting money, requesting action. So how do you kind of break through the noise, so to speak? So when I talk about, just a clarifying point, when we talk about events in this presentation, and Mobilize tends to use the term events, we really mean a lot of different things. Events can mean actions. They can mean getting people to sign a petition to move forward an important piece of policy. They can mean a virtual phone bank where volunteers can call and check on neighbors. There are a lot of different meanings for the word events, not just a big group gathering, but an actual action that somebody does. So the first tactic is to turn in-person opportunities into the virtual ones. And one of the things that we found is really important is making sure that people know they can still help. Similarly, giving people specific actions they can take. So the combination of those two helps to really break through the noise. And the fourth is building hooks to get volunteers to stay involved. So as soon as they have done one action, we have to immediately be asking them to take the next. And just as a quick aside and data to support this, on the right-hand side, this is a screenshot from Mobilize, and this is one of the things. So after a volunteer signs up for an opportunity, Immediately after, they're shown a pop-up which says, will we see you at these other events too? It's one of the ways, it's called chaining. It's one of the ways that we build those hooks. And currently on the platform, 15 to 20% of people sign up for additional events right away, which shows a couple of things, but most importantly, that people who are already engaged really want to take that next action. So building those hooks is a really important thing.
And that ties in really nicely to what I was talking about previously, where, you know, you can't assume because someone is doing your one event that they've registered for, are not going to be involved in anything else. This is a perfect example. You have data to show, yes, when you are showing them other things that they can do to get more engaged in your nonprofit, they will do it.
Right. And just to support, you know, how powerful virtual actions are and how much people want to act, in the last week, took some data over the last week, and 88% of our clients' events were virtual, and 90% of signups were for virtual events. So to give you a picture of kind of how the landscape has shifted over the last 2 weeks, I think even 2 weeks ago, it was 30 to 40% of signups were for virtual, and it's just jumped all the way up to 90. So what that shows is that virtual events are really powerful in engaging people, and people really, really want to act. And you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, I have a lot of in-person opportunities going on that I can't do right now. How in the world do I make them virtual? And Renata is going to take you through and how she's thinking about this with her organization, and we can give you some additional examples as well.
Correct. So thanks. Yes, we typically have in-person events. We have a retreat. Typically, it's a 3 to 5 day retreat where they have the vets and the first responders, their families. We usually do a group ride in the morning or a meditation hike or something along those lines for their mental health. And then in the afternoon, after lunch, they come back and there's workshops where they do creative writing, whether it's working with a clinic or a doctor. Support groups, things of that sort. So, and then it's usually tied to a 2-day ride that exists, and it's a fundraising ride, and the people raising their funds ride right along with the retreat attendees, which is great because then the people who are fundraising can really see the impact their fundraising is having on the lives of these people that they're riding with. So what do you do when that is all taken away and you can't do that anymore? And we are very concerned because the first responders are the front line of what's going on right now, and their mental health is really important. And then there's also the whole issue with isolationism, depression, and you can't go out and have your yoga class or your meditation class or going to the gym or going to see the doctor. What do we do? So one of the first things that we did is we had leveraged Google Hangouts, and we created a group in Google Hangouts, and we started a Q&A session with myself and the founder, and we really listened to what the members and participants needed and what would make them feel still connected to the cause, the community at large. And we did a Q&A session with them, and then we just started keeping these Google Hangout groups. So it became their virtual support group. And then we started saying, okay, well, what do we need yoga classes, because that's one good thing that clears your mind. So we started doing yoga classes. We have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday yoga classes for them, and it's virtual. It's online. They log in, and they can do that. We also have a WhatsApp. We utilize virtual phone banking for them to check in on each other. That coincides with the support group. We have virtual walks that they can do. They can log in or they can walk while it's on, and they can talk to each other. But from the fundraising perspective, we are currently working with a couple of different clients that we sponsors that we've had, and they have reached out and they've asked, how can they help? And we figured, okay, what if we worked with them to create a week-long, every day you can log in and do a boot camp or something along those lines. And at the end of it, there'll be an opportunity for someone to donate at the time. If they, if they had a good class, $5, $10, or whatever it is, it's something. And we don't lose our fundraising abilities here, because I think that's something that we're all struggling with. We can create these great virtual events, but how do you drive fundraising from them? So you have to kind of think creatively on this and really work and leverage with your community partners, your sponsors, and think definitely outside the box. We're trying to put together a cycling event where we'll be generating funds from that, but and that hopefully will go online soon. But really, it's really, and then we also leverage our doctors that we work with and our clinics, because some of them really still need that help, and we're part of the Google Hangouts that we have. We call them happy hours, which is really funny. But most people only have coffee at those happy hours, and then on next week we have a nutritionist speaking, and then we also have someone who's going to be talking about faith and hope and how to get your mind in a good mindset for all this uncertainty hitting us, and what can we do about it. But I think one of the biggest takeaways is leveraging your volunteers and leveraging their input and their empowering them to make a decision or help you form a decision on what your virtual events will look like. I know that's super impactful for them. And then the other thing is include them in on whatever you're doing. So if you have a traditional volunteer that would normally hand out water, invite them to these as well, because they can't do that, but they can do a virtual event with you.
That's great. Thank you, Renata. Really powerful examples, and I think really creative examples of how to use virtual events and how to not just, take the in-person event and make it virtual, but actually thinking about creatively about what are the other virtual events that we hadn't thought of before to do.
Yeah, one of the ones that I did not talk about, but we do have, is also our 20 for Life campaign. It is just kind of like more of a traditional type of event. It's a fundraising event. It's a $20 a month for life to donate. And we do have that on the Mobilized platform because, like you said, I think one of the things we need to do too is take our mindset away from the word event. It's an action that we're asking people to take and to help with this, the suicide rate. So putting them up on Mobilized, getting it more exposure, and also reinventing the word event.
Totally. So once we have kind of the virtual actions down, we have to build an experience that capitalizes on that engagement. And what I mean by that is we have to integrate asks that drive action. And when I talk about calls to action, talking about a lot of different things. What some calls to action on Mobilize, just to sort of give you kind of grounding focus, we do one call to action is bring your friends, get them to share on social media. We talked about suggesting other events, so getting them to attend other things that you guys are doing, getting them to donate. That's a huge one, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then also getting them to give feedback. Their feedback and their kind of input on how that event or action will help you over the long term create better events and actions going forward. So first tactic, identify the areas in this volunteer experience that you have wherever you are in your organization, whatever you have as a volunteer experience, whatever the volunteer kind of sees as they find you, where can you insert really strategic calls to action? And then second, how do you pair those calls to action with impact messages, right? Because that's important, is making sure that every volunteer, every supporter knows exactly what you stand for and what their action will mean to the organization. And then the third is language matters. So we really encourage you to experiment with language. You'll see on the right-hand side, on the leftmost picture where it says share with your friends. This is screenshots from the Mobilized platform, shows kind of the evolution of this bring a friend ask. So after someone signs up, right afterwards, they're prompted to also kind of, here are other events you can attend, but also share with your friends or who you're bringing with you. So the first screenshot on the left is the first iteration, what we came up with about a year ago, which was share with your friends. Great. The next iteration was, thanks, can you bring a friend? And that was a significant change in whether or not people brought their friends. Now we're using, who are you bringing with you? So that slight change from asking if they're going to do it to almost assuming they are going to do it in the language and just asking them who drove a really significant uplift in the number of people who shared with their friends. This is key because a lot of nonprofits right now, especially now, want to grow their list size. It gives you just a wider pool of people to really kind of attract, but also target donation asks to. So what you're really doing, to kind of piggyback on what Renata was talking about earlier, is you're empowering this group of people that is already highly engaged with you and believes in your organization to do a lot of this work for you, which is really simple calls to action. That's probably already what they want to do, and especially the share on social media piece. Now, just to give you a sense of kind of what bring this volunteer journey to life a bit more. So this is the traditional volunteer journey that a lot of nonprofits have, or that I've seen have. Usually the volunteer will discover the opportunity, or they'll do some searching, they'll discover it on your website, and then they'll sign up. And then hopefully somewhere down the line they will show up. Sometimes they won't, hopefully they show up.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Yes, exactly. Exactly. This is what the volunteer journey looks like when it's smarter. So yes, they discover the opportunity. Yes, they sign up. But then you also, right at that peak moment of engagement, right when they decided, I'm going to do something with this organization because I feel like it's really important, ask them to bring their friends. Ask them what other events they're going to attend. Ask them to donate funds to your organization. And then also get them to really give feedback. People, if you provide an easy way, text message, email, a quick thumbs up, thumbs down, you'll get data on how you can make your events easier or better for your community. So why does all this matter? Why should we invest time? Why should we invest resources in making this volunteer journey smarter? Here's why. This is the data that shows what a difference this can make. So we start with discovery. So this is the results from the Mobilized data. This is a typical volunteer journey on Mobilized. This is what all the way from when the volunteer discovers the opportunity all the way to when they are done and giving feedback. So right when they discover an opportunity on Mobilize, because it's super easy to find and easy to sign up, we've really worked on reducing the friction. So it's like a one click to sign up. 20% more people sign up for an action or event. Similarly, when we ask them to bring friends, 40% of volunteers and supporters on Mobilize actually share these opportunities with friends, which leads to a significant increase in signups due to social recruitment, which is a really cool thing. So all of a sudden, without doing any work, you're actually getting a lot more signups and a lot more people on that list who want to help.
Which is great, because how many times you have the waiver the day of and people sign it and then you can't read their handwriting, so you have no way to thank them, or you have no way to redirect and send them more experiences that they can participate in, and you're left with bad data. So this way it's great because you have that information you capture right then and there.
Right, exactly. And like we mentioned, we kind of used this stat already, but 15 to 20% of folks on Mobilize sign up for additional events when suggested to them. Mm-hmm. So that means in these events look very similar to the event that they signed up for with our algorithm. So it's not unlike the thing on Netflix. It's like, oh, you watched this. What would we think you would like this. It's a similar kind of thinking here. And then the donation one is particularly interesting because a lot of nonprofits and a lot of nonprofit leaders that I've spoken to in our research and our experience doing this project is they're really hesitant to ask their volunteers for money. And I think it comes from the fact that, instinctively, it's almost like, oh, they've already given their time, mm-hmm. right? They've already given us this really valuable thing. I don't really want to ask them for anything. But actually, our hypothesis going in was that actually they're super engaged, so let's see what happens. Turns out that especially, and this is just from incorporating it into after they sign up, 15% of volunteers and supporters initiate a donation when shown this ask. And this is just from one point in that journey, right? There's a lot of other places where you could think to incorporate a donation ask, potentially in as a almost like a make good if they flake. So, on Mobilize, you can track whether or not they attended. And if they didn't show or were a no-show, you could say, hey, I'm really sorry we missed you. Would you be willing to donate? And then have that same pop-up or that same message. You could incorporate it also in the feedback ask or the thank you. There's just a lot of moments where I think the volunteer is highly engaged, and I've seen it just personally go so wrong, where you have this engaged volunteer and either they are not asked at the point when they're actually doing the action and at the place and they're so engaged, they're asked, 6 months later when they've sort of forgotten or haven't thought about that organization in a while. And so doing it at this point of kind of peak engagement or at these times when, we can actually shift behavior is increasingly important.
So this is one of my favorite things, promoting each other's events. I know in nonprofit land, this is like a taboo subject that we typically don't like to talk about. But I think in this day and age, especially where we're at right now, we need to come together as a community and we need to support each other. And I have a great experience with this. One, as a director of Bike MS, we had a large group training ride. We had put it out there. It was hosted by a bike shop, and we had the Alzheimer's, and we had the arthritis ride, we had Tour de Cure, we had the Bike Coalition, the San Diego Mountain Biking Association, CalTri. I mean, you name it, they were there and brought their people. They sent it out to everyone. The bike shop sent it out to everyone. And we had about 300 people sign up for this event. And it was amazing. We had raffle items, potluck. It was just a ton of fun. And it got exposure to a whole nother group of people that we traditionally wouldn't have been exposed to, and vice versa. And so we found out, that someone was doing the arthritis ride, and she said, oh, I do this all the time. My friend does it for me because I have arthritis, but I didn't know there was a Bike MS event. I would love to do this ride for her. So it goes back and forth, and you can't think that as much as we'd like to be very egocentric and think, oh, these are my volunteers. They are not your volunteers and yours alone. They do volunteer at other events. Study is about most people support 2 to 3 causes a year traditionally, and to think that you do not partner with anyone else, I think is kind of silly. So one of the things that we're working with right now, we're trying to work with, is the National Association of Suicide Prevention, because it ties in very nicely with what we're doing. And so the good thing about Mobilize is you get to feature your events on each other's sites, so that you have that much more exposure to your events. And I'll let Annie talk a little bit more about that. But 30% of registrations on Mobilize come from someone seeing your event on another's page. So I'll let Annie talk a little bit more of that and the data behind it.
Yeah, I mean, this is just data to show you how powerful it can be to collaborate with one another. When Renata and I were talking about kind of, she sparked this in me. She was the one who kind of raised that example of this really amazing bike event where everybody from a bunch of different organizations came together, and she really facilitated that. And it was really cool to hear, because one of the foundations of the platform that we've thought a lot about is people shouldn't and want to be promoting and collaborating with each other. And so one of the ways that we think about growing our network, we've got that network of nonprofits and the network of volunteers. One of the ways that we kind of meaningfully grow it is by asking, nonprofits can promote each other on the platform in the back end. And what that means is that, as Renata was saying, let's say I was the MS Society and I wanted to work with the Alzheimer's Association, then you promoted each other. If those two organizations promoted each other, the MS Society's events would appear on Alzheimer's events and vice versa. So it's really about kind of back to that idea that volunteers are not a finite resource, particularly when we expand our view of who those volunteers are, and actually it drives more action for everyone.
So this brings us to bonus number 5. In the beginning, we said there were 4. We tricked you guys, and there's 5. Because at the end of the journey, and when they're riding high from the event, and they had such a great time of volunteering and riding and walking and doing whatever they were doing, you can't forget to thank them. Thanking is huge. All different ways you can thank someone. Which a traditional one is just, the generic email that goes out. At least you did it, but it's not like a full impact. We have a lot of times we have a handwritten thank you card. We've done it so that every single person that attends gets a handwritten thank you. That's a great way to have engage your volunteers to do that. And you know what? They can still do that at home. If you want to write thank you cards to your supporters, or just, hey, thinking of you, checking in, making sure you're okay, volunteers can do that from their house too. And then
it's a great virtual event.
Right? It's a great virtual event, right?
Totally.
And then they feel empowered, and they feel like they had an impact, especially if you did a small, homemade video of the staff just saying, thank you so much. It meant so great, or highlighting one specific event that happened that was really, had really great meaning for you or impactful, or having a participant say what they really felt they got the best out of on this ride. So I would always try to include a video in your thank you to them, and show the impact for the cause, and they definitely feel more connected. I don't know if this video is going to run or not.
Unfortunately, we tried it. It doesn't
work. So it will be there.
We can send it out.
We'll send it out to you all. But it's a really nice, it's a polished one that we would use to send out to everyone. However, it doesn't have to be that way. It could be a really simple one. And we found that by doing this, we had a night for Bike MS Beta Bay, the ride that I did, we had 97% of the people who participated and volunteered would recommend it to a friend. That's great stats to have.
That's really awesome. So in summary, we want to make sure that we remind you kind of what we told you at the beginning. So we have to build smarter experiences for volunteers that focus on 2 things: the focus on recruitment and the focus on engagement. And the now 5 things are, first of all, know that your volunteers are more than just one-off people that show up once in a while. These are your board members, these are your staff, these are your donors, these are any supporter that is in any way affiliated or could be affiliated is a potential volunteer. We have to also move to virtual events that are compelling. We have to make them easy to find. We have to get creative and innovative with how we construct these events and the ways that we think about what people really want to do. And as Renata said, if you have questions about that, there's really no better, you can always ask us, we will be here. You can ask Renata and myself, but also ask your volunteers, ask your supporters what they want to do and what they would want to be involved in. Number 3, we have to be asking our volunteers to do more from start to finish, because the truth is, and the data shows, that they really, really want to, and they just need to be asked, and they just need to be prompted in intelligent ways. And 4 is to collaborate with each other, promote each other's events and actions, put them up on each other's websites, on your feeds, whatever you have. You will attract more action, more supporters that way, and volunteers are not finite. And 5 is the bonus number 5 is the meaningful thank you note. This is a really, really powerful way to leave volunteers with a sense that they've really contributed something special to your organization. And we wouldn't want you to miss out on that either. So that concludes the presentation. We just wanted to let you know a couple of things. One, that we're actually, because of the amazing work that you guys are all doing. And I'm sure a lot of you are responding to COVID-19 right now. We're offering free access to the core tier through May 31st. So anyone who is interested, anyone who's doing COVID-19 volunteer mobilization, we want to work with you. You guys are doing the hard, amazing work, and we would be so honored to partner with you. The other pieces, I guess I actually put the 1 p.m. Eastern, which is no longer relevant because it's during this time. So apologies for that. That will not be an option, unfortunately. But we have recordings of these, so we can send these your way. The others are, we're doing, consultations. We had a booth at NTC. We were a sponsor. Unfortunately, we really can't do that in the flesh, but we do offer consultations at our virtual booth anytime between now and Friday. So please come talk to us. If you have questions, we can help you think through kind of how do you make in-person opportunities into virtual. So thank you again so much for being here. We've so enjoyed connecting with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annie and Renata. That was an amazing session. We've got 15 minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask these ladies, they can just pop them into the chat or the Q&A session. Otherwise, we can get started. So question 1 I have from Gianna, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Do you have any insight about how virtual events appeal to older volunteers, or if they do at all? So much of our volunteer base are retirees who might not be super computer literate.
Yeah, Renata, did you want to take that? Or you want me to take it?
Couple of things. One, our group of people that we serve and our volunteers range, a huge age range, and several of them are retired and retirees, and some of them are in their 80s, and they constantly surprise me. I would put it out there, but I would also be very hands-on and walk them through. The good thing about Mobilize, I mean, it is so easy for them to get registered, super duper easy. And the other thing is, we sometimes do the traditional call-in. We'll have the like a Google group or Google Hangout, and they have the call-in option, and they do that. And then sometimes, and then usually someone else from the group will say, hey, let me walk you through how to do it online if you have that ability to be online. So they can do that too. And like I said, the thank you notes, giving them things to do that are not so internet driven, but are simple things that will mean a lot to someone. I don't know about you guys, but in this day and age of everything being online, it is so nice to get a handwritten note, and that really does mean a whole heck of a lot to people in this time.
Yeah, a lot of similar comments from me. I mean, I think we just pulled the stats on this from the platform, and we have people using Mobilize ranging from like age 16 to 90. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that's enabled that is really focusing on making it as easy as possible for people to actually sign up. So reduce any of the friction that happens from that. Another way, we do text messaging as well. So one of the things, so after you sign up for an opportunity, there's a series of 3 automated but also customized messages that come through. One is to kind of confirm, and say, hey, you signed up for this. Actually, you guys probably already did this because you signed up, or if you signed up through Mobilize, you would have seen this. But you'd get a confirmation, and then that would also come through text, and the next 2 would also come through text message. So sometimes I find that older populations use text messages more, so that could be another kind of tactic to keep them engaged.
And the other one too that we have is our group chats on WhatsApp, which is an app kind of like texting, and they can connect through that too. So there's a lot of different ways you can engage them.
I think those are all really great points. I know I like receiving text messages from all of the organizations that I support. So, I mean, I think it affects young and old. So,
yep.
The next question comes
and in between.
And everyone in between, pretty much everyone. Working digitally now, I'm getting a lot more. So the next question we have comes from an anonymous attendee. So what are some strategies for expanding a volunteer base? This has kind of been touched upon throughout the whole presentation, but maybe if we could just reiterate a couple top strategies.
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the things is just leaning into your network. So Mobilize, sort of the foundation of it is that we want to be building constantly and expanding a network of folks that come to mobilized.us, right? So, and then in as much as we can, we want to be putting that sort of recruitment, building that recruitment into the volunteer journey so that volunteers, so you're not doing the work of recruitment. You're asking the volunteers to tap into their own networks for you to grow that list and keep track of those people. Another kind of thing that's sort of interesting, and I think this might apply to some of you, but one of the things that we've experimented with in the last year is sort of it's kind of empowering volunteers to create their own events and their own actions. And that's been a really compelling way to grow the network, because if the volunteers creating it and then sending everybody kind of the link through a platform, then all of those people that they invite will automatically be kind of included in your data set. So as much as you can, I think getting volunteers to do that work and getting a way that as soon as they do that, as soon as they share a social, as soon as they kind of get that friend to sign up, have a way to track that into your own database.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, most of us have our set, volunteers that we normally have. This is I mean, just by utilizing the Mobilized platform, you're already expanding your volunteer base, because these are now 1.7 million people that you probably would not be exposed to, and you would still have your traditional list that you have in your organization. So just doing that alone is already going to expand your group. And then the clever ways of having the volunteers create their own events, or partnering with another nonprofit, that expands your group even more there too. So there's a lot of little ways that you can expand it. I would not say abandon your list. I mean, that's this is just a way to increase your existing list.
Yeah. All right, thank you. And then we've got a third question from Sandra. How are volunteers making calls? So is it from their personal mobile phones, or are there any online calling services that folks could use in case they wanted to protect their personal info?
Annie, I'm going to give you that one. I mean, for us,
Yeah.
For us, it's a little bit different because we do have that WhatsApp, and people are engaged that way, and that's how they kind of call on each other. And they've kind of when they enlist in our retreats, one of the things that they are asked is if they mind fellow members calling them, and then we always ask them ahead of time, would you mind having a phone call from someone? And they usually, and it's not just every Tom, Dick, and Harry are calling each other. These are people that are vetted through us, and they're our ambassadors. So they go through a program and they're able to call. So if they say yes, then we put them in the pool, and then they go in and are called on. But then also having that chat app helps as well. But I'm going to let Annie take it from there with the other part of it.
Yeah, so the phone banking question is an interesting one. We actually got this yesterday, and one of the things, so we don't support the phone banking, explicitly, but we partner with other kind of tech platforms that do. So Nation Builder is one that we work with closely, and we have an integration with most of them. So that one, or Phone to Action. And I'm not quite sure what they're doing in terms of confidentiality, although I imagine that is probably a top priority right now, particularly as all these events are moving virtually. So I think I have a feeling that they are definitely have done something about it, or are definitely thinking about it.
Okay. And so then the last and final question is, do you have any resources that you can share or point me towards for setting up or managing a virtual event? And that question came in anonymously as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from the Mobilized perspective, I would be happy to chat with anybody who wants to know how to turn an in-person event into a virtual one. We actually have a list or a toolkit based on the kind of organization that you are, the issue area that you care about, and some really compelling examples of how clients have turned in-person into virtual and have also thought about additional virtual events. I would also suggest going to mobilized.us and just scrolling through the different kinds of virtual events. I mean, right now, 88% of kind of what our clients have created are virtual. So you will see a lot of really interesting ideas there. But yes, I'd be happy to kind of counsel or consult with anybody who wants to understand better how to do that.
Great. Thank you, Annie. And thank you, both of you, Annie and Renata, for that amazing session. It was really insightful, and I think there's a lot of important takeaways, especially now as we consider our current landscape.
Yeah.
So that concludes the session. Just a reminder that our next session will start at 12 p.m. PST and 3 p.m. EST today, so in about half an hour. This Lunch and Learn session will be led by Big Ducks Sarah Durham and Farah Trumpeter, and they'll be speaking about the importance of donor communications now and forever. So we'll pop a link to the next session in the chat box if you wanted to register, but otherwise that's it. Thanks so much for attending today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.